In today's video, we're going to be talking about Belarus, what's going on in this country, and whether or not we should trust people such as Putin or Lukashenko and support dictatorships that are based in third positionists. Now, as you can see, the New York Times, which is liberal propaganda, but has good editing and pictures, I'm just going to show you right now. We have a confidant, we have an alliance between two far-right dictators, and their names are Putin and Lukashenko. And while, yes, they have elections, it's not really a true election. And as you can see, there's plenty of protests in the country of Belarus, which is located in Eastern Europe. Now, there's peaceful protests, but there's also riots, and the police have to suppress these people, and I completely get it. But also, we have to see at why they are rallying, and of course, it's for a good reason. Now, if we were to look at the economic prosperity index of Belarus, we would see that they're a poor country. Lukashenko has been in power for 25 years, but you can look right here that in terms of their judiciary being weak, the government being very corrupt, their taxes being bad, etc. So clearly they're not doing too well. And if you can look over here, their economy is really pathetic. In fact, their surplus is only 0.1%, but their debt is about 50%. So their debt isn't that high. But because they are a small country, their interest on the debt is way higher than ours, usually. Okay? And now, the taxes are lower than we are. They're at 25%. We are at 40% or 38%, 33%. Okay? So that's a substantial difference. Now, their regulations aren't that bad, but at the same time, they also have a lot of problems. So that's what we have for Belarus. Now, if you look at the score of Russia, you could see that they are a better economy, and in fact, they're a lot richer. Also, they have a lot more rights, and they have lower taxes. Now, their taxes is approximately 24% total, whereas ours are like 30% higher. And now, everything is crappier in that country, but at the same time, they're better off. And they do run a deficit of 1%, so they're an indebted country, and their interest rates are high. But their debt is a relatively small amount of their GDP, which is only 14%. Now, if you look at our country, of course, our debt is enormous, but again, we have low interest rates. Like, if you look over here, the interest on the debt of 26 trillion is only 1/72nd of the size, so that's really manageable, whereas theirs is very high interest. And if we look at the person in charge of Belarus, you can look at Lukashenko, who, of course, he's a contested incumbent of his despot office. He's been in power since 1994, so since soon after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And now this guy's 65, so he does have another 10 years of life, politically speaking, and he does have a little bit of time to control the country. And if you look at the mandate he got, he did not get the majority of the vote, but he got the plurality, so he's not super popular, even if you believe the rigged elections. But as you can see here, in 2001, he was already friends with Putin. So he's been friends with Putin for 20 years approximately. He served multiple terms, and you can look over here that his re-election in 2001, he won with 76% of the vote, which is almost impossible. And in fact, by then he was already rigging the elections. If you look at the third term, again, he won 85% of the vote. Completely bogus. If you look at the fourth term, he was lowering even the pretenses further. Of course, he won 90% of the vote, or 80%. That's retarded. And the voter turnout was 90%. Those are cooked up numbers, again. So, just not a good person at all. A liar. A dictator, basically. And when you look at his economic policies, he's not the best for Belarus. You can look over here, and there's an establishment oligarchy in their country that he's done nothing about. The unemployment rate was approximately 0.6%, and unemployment right now is about 3%, and that's only because the government has a communist system where they employ people, but their wages are terrible. And if you look at the GDP per capita, when he was president, he got it from 1,000 to 5,000, which is really good, but so did Russia increase a ton, and that's not because he's such a great guy either. And when you look at the currency, optimally in Europe, you should have the euro, because that's a good currency, and you can lower your interest rates like in Italy does, and Greece. But because he's not pegged to the ruble dollar, he's clearly having a bad inflation problem as well, and the exchanges are not favorable to him. Now, Lukashenko didn't really care about the coronavirus, which is pretty based, and he said that the people wouldn't get the virus if they drank vodka and went to saunas, and working on tractors would prevent you from getting healed, which is retarded. And apparently there was 15,000 diagnosed cases, which is the highest infection rate of all of Europe, of Eastern Europe, and that's even considering that he's not even testing. And in July 28th, he announced that he was asymptomatic with COVID-19, so he could not care less. When we look at the foreign policy of the country of Belarus, and we can ask, can we trust them? Of course not. They go locked in handshakes, and they go with, they're completely step in step with whatever Putin wants, and what Putin wants is not what we want usually. And he's friends with Bashar al-Assad, which is not a good thing. Now, when we're talking about how much he cooperates with the West, of course, he can meet with Western leaders, so he's not that evil, okay? Now, he has different sort of gaffes. He gives bad optics for the West, and I don't agree necessarily with canceling somebody over what they said, but if we look over the quotes, he thinks he's been construed to be of praising Hitler, which is a bad look. You could look at him saying anti-Semitic things. This is a Jewish city, and the Jews are not concerned for the place that they live in. And then, yeah. So basically, he's accusing the Jews of taking money from Belarus and giving it to Israel, which is interesting. And then he called a gay German foreign minister. He got criticized by him for being a dictator, and he said, "I'd rather be a dictator than gay." So that's an important criticism. It gets under his skin that he's called a dictator, and that's frankly because he is not exactly validated. He has to lie and cheat and break rules and break basic moral codes to win his elections, and I'm personally against that. So that really does get under his skin. But of course, he's not a great guy, and that's what it is. He has all these BS medals, but don't believe the medals. They're from Gaddafi. They're from all these freaking dictators. It's not a good thing. Now, if we look at his credentials, of course, he is more than experienced in the country, 25 years of service, but I don't trust him at all. Now, when we look at the protests are very important to note. These are the biggest protests in the last 25 years, and in fact, we have a ton of white, Belarusians protesting massively, and of course there's riots, but at the same time he's not giving the people what they want, which is a fair election. And if you look at this election, you can see that he won 84%. In what country does a person get 80% of the vote? You don't, because he is a liar, of course. And the internet polls completely don't back this up, of course, but since he is cheating, he gets to win a big league. And here you need verification to be a candidate in the race. So if he thinks that you're going to beat them, if you're going to beat him in a race for the presidency, he'll just deny you being a candidate. So he lets this woman become a candidate, and all the people get pissed after they vote for the women or are not let, and then he's able to win by 80%. And if you look at a poll, you can look at Lukashenko's approval rating in this capital city of Minsk is 24%, and only 11% of the people trust the FEC, basically, of Belarus. So only 11% of them think that the elections are not bogus. Okay, so that's just a fact, right? So the 2020 Belarusian election are completely fake, and they're being called on. He's being called on to resign. And if you look at a map of why this is so important in global politics, you could look that the only people that really congratulated Lukashenko's fake election was Venezuela, which is gay, Honduras, Nicaragua, which is not a good country, Syria, which is under a dictator, Turkey, which is under a dictator, Russia, which is under a dictator. The communistic or former Soviet countries, of course, they're going to back them up. China, we don't like China. Vietnam, we don't like Vietnam. Some of the Muslims, they're crazy. But the Europeans and the West, Canada, America, criticized this election because it was a bogus election, and we believe in if not democracy, then republicanism at some extent. So when we look at the Belarusian protests, this is clearly something that will either make or break the presidency or the dictatorship, so-called, of Alexander Lukashenko, and I can tell you why. And it's in particular because there's so many people, so many parties that are against the government, whether it be Christian Democrats, the Green Party, feminist movements, social democratic parties, a religious party, the communist, etc., etc. And you even have support of Eastern European neighbors of Belarus. So you have the EU against Lukashenko. You have Lithuania, Poland, and the Czech Republic as well. And in terms of how many people were affected, approximately 7,000 were arrested, 200 were injured, well, 300 total, and thousands of people were arrested, which is even worse than what we have in America. And you think that we had it bad. And people like to say, well, the blacks riot, the Mexicans riot, while all these white rioters and protesters are clearly proving you wrong, of course. So this is what happens when you don't have high approval ratings. When it gets bad enough, they're going to try to kill you. And they're going to try to end a dictatorship when they see one. And, of course, when we look at America's enemies, which include Armenia, Moldova, Kyrgyzstan, and Putin, of course, of Russia, you could see that we know that who endorses Lukashenko are people that are not our friends, okay? This is why it's important to notice what's going on. And people are discussing sanctions on Belarus, so this is going to kill their economy. And when they kill their economy, you can see that it's going to hurt him even further. And again, riots every year after the election, because they're all fake elections, okay? Now, what is going on is that there's going to be a union state between Belarus and Russia. You could see that they annexed the Crimea, then they want to annex Belarus. This is Putin's plan, because basically what he wants is that he wants to expand Russia into Europe so that he can conquer more of the Soviet Union, basically, and be able to keep the Europeans away from Moscow and invade it and capitulate the country. And this is an important thing, because if you look at their GDP together, you could see that their GDP would go up, and their power overall would go up, and their population would go up, etc., their military size, all of that stuff. So it's going to basically save their lives if they join together. And, you know, this all goes, and I tell you, Alexander Grigorovich Lukashenko has the same currency, so they have like their own mini EU actually, and they want free migration in the two countries, etc. And the Russians want to expand the thing to these countries in the blue and then the pink and the purple, because they want to gain more power, of course. And if you look at this diagram, you could see that the Russians want to expand their influence not only into Belarus, but also Asian nations and the Baltics, etc. So that's not a good thing at all. And in fact, it's kind of interesting how they want to combine each other. Isn't that insane? Now, if we look at the energy situation with Belarus, you could see that 25% of Belarus's economy is directly from Moscow, Putin buying oil from Belarus and then selling it back to them. So it's a way to give them $100 billion a year, ostensibly. And what this does is that in exchange for propping up their economy by 25% a year, the Belarusians will completely cuck to Moscow and capitulate. So in fact, the relationship between Russia and Belarus is more like Canada and America, rather than, let's say, Canada and Norway. So they're not friends. One's just like the subservient one, and Putin controls Lukashenko completely and the economy completely in Belarus. The Europeans will try to sanction and blockade Belarus, which in exchange will either make Belarus's economy suffer or have the Russians chip in more to Belarus, which will mean that Russia has more control, which means they'll annex them further and faster. So that's what's going to happen. Now, if we look at the oil distribution, geopolitically speaking, this is extremely important, as they can control different countries with who controls the pipelines. And the impact is completely enormous. And in fact, everything can be deterministically placed on the owner of the oil in Europe. In fact, very important to understand. The Russians got help from the Belarusians in the war against Ukraine. This was all planned by the two of them. And again, just understand this, that All these pipelines mean everything. You think wars for oil? Well, yeah, because oil is extremely important. And so this is what it is. This is what's happening. When we look at the Russians' economy, they're going to swallow up Belarus, which will make them more powerful than a lot of countries, in fact. And they're a lot richer than our countries, such as, let's say, almost all the Latin American countries. It's going to be very important that they swallow up each other, which is why we shouldn't trust Belarus, and why the election in Belarus was bogus, and why we shouldn't ever let down our guard with the East. And you may say that, oh well, we should be able to let Putin do his thing. Putin's a nationalist. We're nationalists. We should not intervene into Belarus. And to that I say, when there was Jews being murdered in the Minsk ghetto, do you really think we should have just not have came in there? If you think that Belarus is going to be annexed by the Russians, do you think that's a good idea? When in fact they are bordering so many different places that are our ally. I personally don't think that's a good idea. And obviously, when they're so intertwined, you can just not trust them at all. Which is why I believe that we should just completely try to weaken both parties, but at the same time, we have to make sure that there's democracy in these countries. And that doesn't mean we should invade the countries, but I do think that if we can support the person who's running against them next time or this time or whatever, then that should be important, because the people of Belarus deserve to have a democracy. And whatever we do, we're not going to send troops to Belarus, but we are going to nudge them in a certain direction. And if that means $1 billion from the CIA, honestly, I do think it's worth it. Okay? Does that make me a neocon? I don't really think so, but the fact still stands that our entire economy is based off of oil, and if the Russians and the Belarusians control more oil in Europe, we're going to sell less, which means we have less money for ourselves. So let's put America first and Europe first, and let's put democracy first. By that I mean we should be able to keep the peace in Europe, and we should be able to stop these guys from collaborating against the West, which means we should not let Bashar al-Assad control Syria and then spread around to Lebanon, blow up Israel, blow up Saudi Arabia, etc. We got to look at who is our ally. And as of right now, Putin is not an ally, and Lukashenko is not an ally. And just because he's based doesn't mean that he deserves to be a tyrant and arrest people for protesting. That's my position. Does that make me a moderate? Not really. Does that make me a sane human being? Yes. So what do you think down below? Is Lukashenko our guy or not? Is he a dictator or not? That's the question. Thank you.